You all is just for or that Skylar passed out is for a different training in College Station. It goes more in depth about the topic that we're going to be talking about today. It goes over protocols, do's, don'ts, insurance policies, whole nine yards. So, but today we're just going to talk about safe families and safe churches. A little bit about me. I graduated from Stephen F. Austin with my bachelor's in family growth and child studies. I'm a trained forensic interviewer, and I have been since 2014 at our local Children's Advocacy Center. If you're in the state of Texas, you have a Children's Advocacy Center in your area or that covers your county. So there's 71 CACs, as we call them. If you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to get familiar with them. They take volunteers. It's a great opportunity to invest in your community and just kind of have that resource available for you and for your church. With that, I'm also a trainer for the Children's Advocacy Center of Texas, so I'm one of 6 that trains other forensic interviewers across the state. So I have trained a little over 100 forensic interviewers on how to conduct forensic interviews. And then I've also had over 300 hours of child abuse training in this topic, and I've interviewed over 1,000 children of victims of abuse. So I'm a little bit familiar with the topic, to say the least. We know child abuse feels a world away from all the consuming crisis our world finds itself in, but we know it rages on in the background as it's ongoing. Seemingly permanent, public health crisis affecting 1 in 10 children. So let's talk about it, let's be informed, and it's happening. I did put this on a handout that you received because I know it is small, but these statistics are mind-boggling, even for someone that does this on a daily. But today, 175 Texas children will be victims of abuse. That's astronomical. Like, that's insane. At our CAC, we cover Angelina, Nacogdoches, and Sabine County. We average 60 kiddos a month for the 3 counties. You go somewhere like Houston, Dallas, they're averaging 200 a month. And even then, they kind of narrow theirs down. We see anywhere from sexual abuse, physical abuse, eyewitness, to anyone who may be at risk for abuse. Houston only sees sexual abuse cases because their clientele, their numbers are so high, their reports are so high, they cannot see them all. So 1 in 10 children will be sexually assaulted before their 18th birthday, with 7.5 million children residing in Texas. This would equal 750,000 child victims of abuse. The Adverse Childhood Experience Study demonstrates that children who have experienced trauma are more likely to engage in early initiation of smoking, sexual activity, illicit drug use, and suicide. So a lot of times the kiddos that we see that come into our center, they're sexually abused, but there's so much more going on in the background, or they have a lot of behavioral issues, and so they're already put into the juvenile system, they're already put into those alternative schools, and then it's kind of things come out. And we're like, well, it makes sense why they've been hooked on these drugs since they were 14 or 10 because of their life. So according to the National Institute of Justice, abused and neglected children are 59% more likely to be arrested for a juvenile crime, 28% more likely to be arrested as an adult. A lot of times the adults that we encounter day to day, they've had some type of trauma. I can't tell you the number of parents that have sat in front of us and cried because they said, this happened to me, I never got help, and now then here we are, and I'm dealing it with my child, and I never thought that this would happen to them too. It's a cycle. So what is sexual abuse? This is according to the Texas State Family Code. Sexual conduct is harmful to a child's mental, emotional, or physical welfare, including conduct that constitute the offense of indecency with a child, sexual assault, or aggravated sexual assault. Failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent sexual conduct harmful to a child, compelling or encouraging the child to engage in sexual conduct, and causing, permitting, encouraging, engaging in, or allowing the photographing, filming, or depicting the child if the person knew or should have known that the resulting photograph, film, or depiction of the child is obscene or pornographic. Meaning if you're distributing or producing child pornography, or if you're assaulting a child or fondling a child in any way, that's all considered sexual abuse. Physical abuse is the injury that results in substantial harm to the child or the genuine threat of substantial harm from physical injury to the child, including an injury that is at variance with the history or explanation given, and excluding an accident or reasonable discipline by a parent or guardian that does not expose the child to a substantial risk of harm. Physical abuse also includes failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent an action by another person that results in physical injury that results in substantial harm to a child. So if you know that someone significant or someone in that child's life is beating the child and you still continue to leave that child with that person, you're allowing that to happen. You're allowing that physical abuse to take place. Now, we do have cases where injuries don't really add up to the parent's story, and so that's something that's investigated. Or medical professionals are like, this person said this kid kicked the ball and his femur broke. That's absurd. And so things like that get reported. But we also know that freak accidents happen, right? And so it's something that we do investigate. They do look into that. And sometimes things get rolled out, and sometimes there's a bigger picture. We've had kids that come in where there's absolutely no marks and bruises in any visible area, but then when our nurse goes to take a look, everything that is covered by a piece of clothing has a marking on it. Some of the worst child abuse cases that I've seen didn't have any injuries on their arms or their legs. It was all on their abdomen and on their back. Neglect. The leaving of a child in a situation where the child would be exposed to a substantial risk of physical or mental harm without arranging for necessary care of the child and the demonstration of an intent not to return by a parent or guardian of the child. You see a lot of neglect cases in low-income homes, poverty situations, where the mom's like, I can't make ends meet. This person volunteered to keep my kid. I know they use drugs, but I have no other option. If I have to keep my lights on, that's the only person that'll keep my kid for free. Neglectful supervision, or I had no one else to give. My 10-year-old kind of seems responsible, so I left him at home with an 8-month-old baby. He knows how to make a bottle. Sex trafficking statistics. This is something that is definitely on the climb. We have, believe it or not, sex trafficking here in Angelina County and Nacogdoches County. We're currently investigating a case now in one of our counties with a sex trafficking ring. And it's in our high schools. So it's not just adults that are sex trafficking. There's minors. There's a whole other training on that. But it is happening, and it's happening within the kids that we're encountering day to day. 1 in 3 runaways are lured within 48 hours. They're at their most vulnerable time in their life, and they're easy to be picked up and easy to be brought into a trafficking ring where they, in the beginning, feel loved and cared for. The average age of entry into prostitution is 12 to 14 years old. 70% of victims experience physical or sexual abuse in their home. We often tell our law enforcement people, let's figure out why they're running away from home. Because a child doesn't run away from a stable home with good parents, that nothing is going on, right? And we know some parents are like, I took away their phone and they left the house. Okay, well, we have those too, right? But this is a frequent flyer. You just recovered her last week and she's gone again. What is going on? So how do you report these types of abuse? This is also in your handout there, the Texas Child Abuse Hotline number. This is across the state of Texas. In September of 2023, you can no longer anonymously report. I know that sounds terrifying as a reporter, especially if you're worried that something is going to happen. But for people who are in the field and working these cases, that is a blessing in disguise, because I can't tell you the number of times where they're like, I don't know, we have a 6-year-old, they don't know where they live, they don't know who it is, it's a pretty bad event narrative that's on here, and I have no one to contact to follow up with. So what happens to that case? It gets put out. There's nothing that they can do. You know how many 6-year-olds are in the area or even at that school? Like, where do you want me to start? And so what was happening was our DFPS, which is our Department of Family Protective Services here in the state of Texas, was like, I have no way to get in contact. And so they made that law pass through. It is illegal for that worker to release the reporting information. So if you call in a report, know that the reporter, it's basically there for the reporter to contact you if they have follow-up questions, not for them to give to that person or to the offender. Oftentimes I've sat with people and they're like, I know exactly who called in this report. And we're like, who? Well, my ex's parents want custody of this kid and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes they are way out and we're like, nope, that wasn't it. And sometimes they're spot on because there's been so many family dynamics happen that it's obvious. But you have to report these cases, period. So if you don't want to sit on the hotline number, which does take a little bit of time, you're welcome to go online and you can submit your report through the texasabusehotline.org. It's txabusehotline.org. You can call local law enforcement and then contact the hotline number. So at every CAC, we have what we call a statewide intake coordinator. And what happened was law enforcement's out in the field, right? If you don't see an officer out there, it's like, what are they doing? Where are they? Where's the presence, right? Or they're out investigating these cases. They're not sitting at their computer or sitting at the fax machine waiting on another report to come through to see what they can do next. And so what was happening was they were getting overlooked. So all of these intakes that were coming through, I'll back up and say CPS does not investigate cases where there's an out-of-home perpetrator. Doesn't mean that they don't care. Doesn't mean that they don't want to help in some form or fashion. That's their protocols. And so it's so hard whenever they have a case come through, and how the process works is a report comes through and it's sent to some screeners in Austin. The screeners report it and say, out of home, not our problem. Send it on to law enforcement. And that form gets emailed to law enforcement, and that detective may not even be there anymore, right? It's whatever email they were given when this initially set up, or it's given to a fax machine. And so now then our CACs in the state of Texas have statewide intake coordinators saying, I know y'all are getting overworked, y'all are getting slammed with these cases. I'm going to read this report for you, and this is how I can help. And so that's why we encourage you to call your local law enforcement, but also still make that report to the hotline. So that way someone at your local CAC can get that report, they can see that, they can follow up with it. But also, if that perpetrator or that suspect is not in the home, law enforcement is aware of the situation. So you can either call that dispatch non-emergency number and say, I need to make a report of child abuse, and they'll more than likely send an officer out to where you're at, or they'll encourage you to come up to the station and make that report. If that child is still in the home with that person, CPS does have a requirement of once they receive that report, they have, if it's an in-home perpetrator, it's actively happening, they have certain rankings that they have to follow and deadlines that they have to meet in order to follow up with that family. So usually within 3 to 4 days, that person has already been contacted if it meets the criteria. Anyone over the age of 18 that suspects abuse must report. And the key word there is suspects it. You're not investigators. We're Sunday school teachers, right? You may be an investigator or a forensic interviewer or a CPS worker Monday through Friday, but on Sunday, you're a Sunday school worker and you're a minister. It's a crime for professional reporters to fail to report suspected child abuse and neglect. In the state of Texas, there's family code that says that charges can be filed against you. And if it comes down to the end of the day and they're like, I told my Sunday school teacher 4 times that this was happening, and they just said they would talk to them and nothing was ever done, 1, you have failed that child. You've committed a crime, and that child had to last so many more weeks or months with the abuse occurring, right? Because you thought you could fix the situation. We can't fix suspects. We can't fix perpetrators by just having a sit down, let's pat them on the back, let's talk to them, I'll be your mentor, let's get through this, right? They need significant help. So I'll tell kind of a quick story about how my husband and I teach our tweens class here at Eastview. We had a kid come in on the bus, and at the end of Sunday school, we had a little bit of extra time, so Kims were playing, and she was just kind of tired. She'd only been here a couple of times, and she made the comment of, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. And I think Skylar responded, and he was like, oh, I'm sorry about that, just couldn't go to bed or what? And no, my parents were fighting. And he immediately was like, I'm back out of this one, like you can come over here and handle this. And so I was like, I got it. We're good. And so we, at 10:45, I don't know if you're familiar with our program, but our Sunday school kids are in classrooms from 10 to 10:45. And at 10:45, they get released to Kids View. So we kept her back. I said, I want to know more about that. So I want you to hang out in here with me for just a little bit, right? Her parents were fighting. It could have been a one-time argument. I don't know, but she lost sleep. And it's clearly enough for her to be like, I couldn't get rest. She's distraught over this. And so in that moment, it was super hard for me to not sit down and say, tell me everything about what happened last night. Because that's what I do Monday through Friday, right? 8 to 5. Tell me everything about that. And then what happened? And then what happened? I need to know every detail. But in that moment, I'm a Sunday school teacher. So I said, I want to know more about your parents fighting, but let's start with what their names are. So that way I can understand you better. So she told me her names, and I wrote her names down. I said, does anybody else live in the home? Yeah, I have a brother. Okay, so I wrote her brother's name. How old is he? Put that information down. Do you remember your address? Yeah, I live, and we obviously knew it was a surrounding area neighborhood, right? Our bus went and picked him up. I said, okay. And I said, so you said they were fighting? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, I know that I can't do anything about it today, but I'm going to see if I can reach out to someone that can. And that was it. That was all I had. I knew in that moment if we asked more questions, I would be deemed as the outcry witness. I knew that I could potentially harm an investigation if it goes to court, and it's to that extent of, but you're the Sunday school teacher, but you're a trained forensic interviewer. But it wasn't recorded, right? It wasn't audio and video recorded. So how do we know that the kid said these things? Are you sure that you didn't coerce her? Are you sure you didn't ask any leading questions? Because as a Sunday school teacher, I mean, you want to keep the kids safe. How do I know you didn't want her just removed from the home? So those are the questions that you're going to get asked when you're a defense attorney and you're taking the stand. And if you don't have the proper answers to that, it could really mess up a case. Because the only thing that these defense attorneys have to go off of is consistency. So a couple of things when you're responding to an outcry. Remain calm, right? I know that this may be a situation that you aren't familiar with. It may be the first time that a kid's ever come to you and said something, and it can be hard. So if you feel like, I just can't do this, I'm really emotional, take a second. Say, I'm just going to step out of the room really quick. I'll be right back. I want to know more about this. And then maybe kind of regather yourself, take a deep breath, grab a pen and paper, and then go back in and sit down with them. Believe the child. It's not your job to do the polygraph. It's not your job to figure out all the details. Just believe the child. Allow them to talk. Show interest and concern. And reassure and support the child's feelings. Take action because it could save the child's life. Don't panic or overreact. Tell me more about that situation. Press the child to talk. You know, you said this happened, but that's kind of all you're saying, so I don't really know. It's if you suspect abuse, right? Not if you know that it's happening. Not if you saw it happening. Not if you have proof that it's happening. It's if you suspect the abuse has occurred. Don't promise anything you can't control. I know a lot of times, and I deal with a lot of people that are like, I made the report and the kids should have been removed and they weren't. And I told them that they wouldn't have to go back home to them. You don't know that CPS's protocol. And I'll tell you right now, we cover 3 counties. The state of Texas is protecting themselves. And so many policies and procedures have changed that although a lot of times our investigators are angry and frustrated because they too feel like this child should not go home, policies state otherwise. And they have to follow what those protocols say and what that attorney is telling them to do. And so the last thing we want to do is make promises that we can't keep, right? Don't confront the offender. Oh my word, I can't tell you. Well, and then we left the house and we went and talked to them. Okay, so now then what leg does anyone have to stand on? They have an excuse, they have an alibi, or they've left, right? We have a lot of people that flee the country. Let that be law enforcement's job. A lot of times the offender is the very last person that gets talked to in these cases because they want to have as much evidence as they can and really catch them off guard. Don't blame or minimize the child's feelings. Well, I mean, you knew that he was that age, so I don't know why you continued to talk to them or text them, or I told you shouldn't have gone there, that it was going to be no good. They're children, right? How many mistakes did we make when we were children? Don't overwhelm the child with questions, right? We have a lot of people who really are just sincere and they feel like they're kind of in that like fight or flight freeze moment. And they're like, I don't know, I just gathered everything and I just ask everything. And then they get to where the people that are sitting there that are trained and they're saying, hey, tell me more about this. And they're going, do I have to talk about this again? I already told them that. It can be hard. I know it's hard. But we have to remember at the end of the day, we're the Sunday school teacher. We're there to love them. We're there to believe them. And we're there to teach them. We are not there to investigate. So what is an outcry witness? And are you one? The first person over the age of 18 that the victim disclosed their abuse to in detail. So they could have told a friend, they could have told another friend, and then another friend. But anyone over the age of 18, when in this case it goes time to go to court, if this person doesn't take a plea or it moves forward with significant charges, and so it's time to go to court, these cases don't go the next week. They're not completed within the month. They're not completed within the year. And so a lot of times when it comes time to go to court, and I've dealt with many district attorneys and many prosecutors that say, the patrol officer is my outcry witness in this case. And you can see them just cringe. And you're like, but the patrol officer's trained, right? They go through all this. They're not recorded. They're not trained on how to ask open-ended, non-leading questions, right? They investigate. They interrogate. The Sunday school teacher is my outcry witness, but they didn't write anything down, and they can't remember the number of times or the color of shirt, and that's what the defense is going off of, is the number of times and the color of their shirt. Like I said earlier, inconsistency is what they have. That's the only thing the defendant really has to go off of. So what does that consist of? You are an outcry witness. Unfortunately, the child just started spilling things to you, and you don't know how to make it stop, and you're like, they won't talk to anybody else but you, and they've told you they're not going to talk to anybody else but you, and so what do? So now then, you get the phone call probably 2 to 3 years later, if you're lucky, and they say, hey, you're an outcry witness in this case, we need you to come on this date, we're going to send you a subpoena, and you're going to need to testify in a criminal regarding to the victim that outcried to you on this day at this time, and you made the report. Your statement must be consistent. We have a lot of cases that come in where, as a professional, everything I have is video and audio recorded. Thankfully for me, I get to go back 4 years later, watch that video, transcribe everything word for word. I remember what her body language looks like. I remember what color her shirt looks like. Why? Because I have the recording. You can ask me about the kids last week that I interviewed, and I won't remember a single thing. I can't tell you the number of times or what color shirt they were wearing when they were sitting in front of me, right? That's just the way our brain works. So when you take the stand and they say, you said it happened 4 times, but everyone else is saying 2, so she exaggerated. She may or he may have really told you 2 times, and you just cannot remember. That's why I say it's important to grab a pen and paper and hold on to that. Let law enforcement know, hey, this is what she told me. I wrote it down. You're welcome to take it, but I would like to make a copy of it first. So fighting the new drug. I know that Sister Vicki Oliver talked a little bit about this last night, but it's pornography. And we are seeing so many more cases because of this right here. Eventually, you can look at it for so long before you have to act on it. The common themes, the mainstream hardcore pornography today include teens and children, incest, racism, slavery, rape, and extreme violence. Many young people are exposed to this kind of material before puberty, and many are consuming it regularly. Yet we attempt to solve child exploitation and sexual violence without connecting the dot. The average age of a kid seeing pornography for the first time is 8 years old. Our Sunday school kids are fighting, right? They're going in and out of schools. You can put them in a private school. You can put them in a public school. You can put them in, you're homeschooling them, right? Well, I sit right there with them every day. But we all know, right, it's not like it used to be in the old days where you had to go to a certain store and you had to make effort to get to the room. It's everywhere. You walk by in the grocery store and there's magazines and we all know that if you view pornography, the same adrenaline that you get when you're using methamphetamines, that dopamine that's released in your brain, it's 3 times that level. You're immediately addicted. More people go to porn sites each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. 90% of porn scenes contain violence. Free porn is serving as a major form of sexual education to young people. It gives unrealistic ideas about sex. Often the violence is inappropriate, and women are to be subjected. Porn changes a kid's view of what relationships should be. I can't tell you how many times a parent comes in and says, well, I'm just uncomfortable talking to my kid about that. They're not there yet. If they ask you a question and you are their parent, not their Sunday school teacher, I'm going to speak to the parents for a second. If they ask you a question, I encourage you now, it may be uncomfortable, be honest with them, be open with them. Because if you're not telling them, they're going to figure it out from someone. And Susie or John's house may not have the same protection that you have on your house. Oftentimes we see kids that were like, where did you learn this from? Well, my neighbor showed me. Okay. Mom's like, I had no idea the neighbor had a smart TV that was unmonitored in their room. Like, I had no idea the kid had an iPad that could connect to the internet. So, children exposed to pornography tend to engage in sexual acts as younger ages. I told y'all the average age of first internet exposure to pornography is between 8 to 11. We're seeing porn as part of most of our sexual assault cases. They have something now that there's an entire new program that's released called Problematic Sexual Behavior. And it's just built for these juvenile offenders, and they have to be anywhere from 12 and under. They can't commit more than so many offenses. They can't be aggressive when they commit these offenses. And it's basically saying they saw something, they repeated it, and now then we're going to try to counsel them and rewire their brains to make them understand that what they saw was not normal and it was wrong. And it's weeks of intensive counseling. And that's step one, right? And then you hope it was successful. But say they're 7-year-old and they broke into someone's houses and they've tried to commit a sexual assault of an adult, because I've worked that case too. They're 7. Juvenile system can't do anything until they're 10. So what do we do with a 7-year-old in the meantime? Well, let's send him off to a mental health hospital and see what can happen. And the mental health hospital comes back and says, okay, he's done. He was here for a week and everything's fine. That's it. So then we have to wait around until they're 10. Where is this kid going between 7 to 10, right? They went to a mental health hospital. They got treatment. Now where are they? They're back in school. They're back in your classroom. So we have to be mindful of this. So child sexual abuse material is one of the fastest growing online businesses. There's an undeniable link between the objectification that occurs in pornography. National Center of Missing and Exploited Children found that 43% of child sexual abuse material is produced by a guardian, neighbor, or family friend, meaning that the biggest threat to your child's safety are those that are closest to you. I can't tell you the number of times where we have people come in and they're like, I thought that I could trust this person. It's my dad. It's the kid's dad. It's the kid's stepdad. It's my boyfriend. I'm planning to, like, this is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. It's a teacher. It's a pastor at a church. Someone in ministry. In a sex offender treatment program at Butner Federal Prison, 85% of child sex abuse material possessors admit to having child sexual abuse victims. So if they're viewing child pornography, they're acting out on it. Dispelling the myth that pornography is exclusively a means of acting out one's fantasy. For many, the fantasy becomes less appealing and eventually leads them to seeking real-life victims. There was a study done, I can't remember exactly, I was listening to a podcast, and they interviewed people in a prison, sex offenders, who had convicted to the crime and was in prison for life. And they asked them, was there certain victims that you wouldn't assault? And they said yes. And there was a consistent routine or consistent answer to that of if they were educated about their body, if they knew the proper terms, if they knew what to call their anatomy, we knew that their parents had taught them safety. And we knew that they would more than likely rat us out, so we didn't touch them. I cannot tell you the number of times that we sit there and we're like, why do you call it that, right? One of the trainings that we use often within the Children's Advocacy Center of Texas is there was a case where the little boy came in and outcried to the teacher of Uncle touched the cookie. And this kid was distraught, right? This teacher's doing store time, and she's like, I got to tell you something. My uncle touched that cookie. She's like, okay, well, we'll talk about it later, right? And so they go into it, and then a little bit later, she's like, I really need to tell y'all my uncle touched my cookie, and they were distraught. And the teacher is thinking, right, like a cookie. Like, okay, well, let's finish through story time. Let's get there. Come to find out, that's what they had been calling their private area. The kid had tried to tell multiple people. I encourage you now, if you're around children, if you have any impact on families, we call our nose, our eyes. We need to call our other private areas if you want to call them bottom or PP, whatever, something that I can identify with that, right? We laugh because Skylar and I have a 4-year-old, and you can ask her, what is this? And she'll tell you. And my dad was picking on her one day, and we have a little too, and he said, she was over there, Ellery, if Ellery doesn't get over here, you're going to get a spanking. And Dad said, ooh, and then what's going to happen? He likes to get her all riled up. And she said, she's going to get a spanking. My dad said, where is she going to get a spanking? And she said, over here. And he goes, but where? And he goes, by my mom and dad. She goes, but where? And she goes, on her vagina and her butt. And my dad about fell out in the chair, and I looked at him and I said, and do you have any other questions for her? And he was like, man, we're done. And my mom just laughed and walked off. And I mean, he was just like, I'm like, she knows. She knows. So I can't encourage you enough, if you have little children, if you are a grandparent and you have an impact in your children's life and how they parent their children, read them these statistics, bring it back to them. Here's my contact information. I have gone to many of churches, schools, and done a similar presentation. I know that we kind of have a time crunch, so I didn't go over the top 10 dangerous apps. I didn't go over the in-depths of pornography. I didn't go over the in-depths of sex trafficking. But I don't know. The session ends at 10:30? Okay. So I have a little bit of time to tell you a little bit about my story as a victim. And when I was probably around 8 or 9, I became a victim of sexual abuse. And when I was about 12 to 13 was the first time that I disclosed my sexual abuse to anyone, and it was to my youth pastor's wife. And unfortunately at the time, right, there was not these trainings, there was not the do's and don'ts, the education is not out there like it is today. But she did give me a timeline, and you have until this day at this time to tell your parents. And I'm like, okay. And so I came around and I disclosed that abuse to my parents. I grew up in a very loving home, very protective family, and it was a relative. So I say all that to say, and I remember when I first came out about it or told someone about it, the biggest, I guess, barrier for me was because I thought, we're Pentecostal. It doesn't happen in our church. It doesn't happen in these types of homes. And so that relative wasn't in church, and so I'm just not going to say anything. And I didn't. And it continued to get worse. And there were other victims. But because of that, I didn't tell. And so I think the only thing that we can do today now is educate, right? I ended up telling my family, and it moved forward, and the problem stopped, right? I got help, and by the grace of God, I am where I am now. I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, and I stumbled upon a place called Harold's House when I was working at a daycare, and a relative of mine was working there. She said, I think you'd really enjoy it. Just come be a part-time worker. And I was like, well, I want to be a kindergarten teacher, but I don't want to be in a daycare, and I'm tired of being in a daycare. So sure, I'll try it. I just have to answer the phones right, but I'm still going to be a kindergarten teacher. She was like, yeah, that's fine. Just come answer phones. And so I started answering the phones there, and one day I remember coming home after work, and I fell on my knees, and I was like, God, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm going to be a kindergarten teacher, but it just doesn't feel right, and I love this organization, and I love what they do, and I love these children that we're encountering. And he said, why do you think I placed you there? And so immediately the next day I went to the school counselor, and I said, I need to change my degree. I no longer want to do education. This is kind of what I want to do. This is the field I want to go in. And so at the age of 19, we still look back at our CAC and we laugh because we were like, I had no business being in Austin, training for this, but there I was. We had to jump through a few barriers to make sure that it was okay for me to go and be a forensic interviewer at 19 years old in the state of Texas. And I went to training, came back, and never left. And oftentimes I have hard days at home, and I come home and I pray, and I have my husband there, and he sits with me and holds me as I cry, because we can't tell a lot of our cases. It's not like a teacher where you get to come home and you get to say, oh, this kid so-and-so, I talked about him all week long, he's back. I don't get to say that. This kid's in his school that he teaches at. This kid's in the hall that he sees every day, right? So I come home and I just have to give it to God, and that's what you have to do, right? So again, we average about 60 cases a month. We're small, Angelina, Nacogdoches, Sabine County. I can only imagine some of the areas that you're from, some of the cases that you've read about in your news system, your news reports, your churches, your families. But it is so important to take that stand and to protect that child at the end of the day. It doesn't matter who that suspect is, who the perpetrator is, what position they hold, what position they don't hold. You have got to make that report. Any questions? No. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned, that like the example from your classroom where the child mentioned they were tired. What are some other examples of like things that you should be aware of? Is it only when they speak things, or is
no.
there maybe some common behaviors that are like that's a clear sign or?
Yes. So one of the big things that we focus on is how are they dressed for physical abuse cases? It's the dead heat of the day, and they're coming in a turtleneck. Is that all that family can afford? That's the only outfit that mom deems appropriate for him to get on the bus and ride to church? Or she's a single mom with 6 kids, right? We all have probably 1 or 2 of those in our church. And they're like, I just can't afford to buy him a short sleeve button down, But if they're acting out sexually, if you tend to see like this little girl wants to give me a hug every 5 minutes in Sunday school class, right? They show more affection than typical your other child who may be a safe place. But they're also maybe withdrawn a little bit too. There is no check mark for sexual abuse. There's no, we always say sexual abuse, physical abuse, that it doesn't discriminate. So oftentimes what we kind of say is if they're bedwetting, which I know as a Sunday school teacher you may not know what's going on in their home, but if moms came to you and she's like, we were potty trained completely and now we're backing up. Now then she doesn't want to leave. They don't want to relieve their mom, or they don't want to go home. That's another big thing too. They're 5 years old and they are literally, mom is like wrestling them to get them in the car to go home, right? If the child doesn't have any disabilities that we're aware of, that's a red flag. And I know that they have ABLE ministry, and they'll kind of go into that more and talk about dealing with children with disabilities. And that may look, some of those things may check the same box as a child that's been abused. But if they're withdrawn, if they're kind of clingier, there really is no like, yes, no, this is something we need to look for. But if they say things that you're like, how does that kid know what that is? Our rule in our classroom is no phones. I don't care if you are playing a game, no phones. So, and we'll immediately like, go ahead and put your phones up, because what are they showing those other children? What do they talk about? If you just sit back and you allow them to have 5-10 minutes of just chit chat, we do at the beginning of our class and we do at the end of our class. Just listen to those conversations. What are they talking about? We had a kid come in one Sunday and gave Skylar a hug, and he said, I had a hard time. And Skylar said, I'm sorry to hear that. My grandpa passed away. We had another kid come in from the same family a couple of weeks prior and said, my dad left and I don't know why he would ever leave his only daughter. Just building those relationships, you find out so much about these kids. So it's more than just teaching a class. The big thing about like physical abuse, if you see any bruising, right, we always say if they're not cruising, they're not bruising. So if they're not toddlers, if they're not crawling, my poor 18-month-old, her wonderful teacher's here today, she's got knots on her head, she's got bruises on her leg, right? Ellery is like, we call her Wreck-It Ralph. She's just a bull in a china, she don't care. She just anything and everything. But if they have bruises and you're like, that on their upper arm, that looks like where a hand would grab. They've got a black eye, right? How many times have you knocked your head and ended up with a full black eye, right? It's pretty rare. So if you've got an 8-year-old and, hey, like, what happened to your eye? Is it really they were out playing baseball in the yard with a bunch of kids and they hit the bat and I was behind them? Okay. But if the stories are inconsistent, if things are changing, if you notice that there's just a lot of physical, like they constantly want to hold someone, they constantly want to touch someone, those are things that you want to look out for. And in that training brochure that or pamphlet, whatever you want to call it, that My Safe Churches, it's not affiliated with the UPCI. It's open to all church denominations, but it is held at College Station and at Victory with Brother Castleberry's church. He's kind of the one that kind of started that conference team. And it goes more in depth on recognizing, reporting, educating. We've got law enforcement, we've got prosecutors, we have insurance agents that come in and say, this is what your church needs, this is what your Sunday school policy should look like in order to be protected. Because it's not, you can protect yourself, but I've worked a lot of cases too, right, where they're like, nothing really happened here. This girl has made this stuff up, and this poor man, his whole life is about to be ruined because we can't ignore what she's saying, and so they're going to have to dig and dig and dig to prove that really didn't happen. And so protecting yourself, protecting your ministry, I can't encourage you enough. There's too many apps out nowadays for you to have one-on-one contact with anyone within your ministry. So there's GroupMe, there's online, I don't even know, I can't even start. We use GroupMe, that's kind of our biggest one. There's Planning Center, ways that you can send out notifications to your group. I always encourage you that if someone side texts you and say, hey, brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so, I can't remember what time we need to get on the bus there, right? It's an innocent text. Go back to your main messaging. Hey, I've had a few people ask what time we need to be there today. Just wanted to send out another reminder. This is the dress code. Here's the time that you need to arrive at the church, and you need to have this much money to bring with you. Sunday school teachers, right? Hey, put the parents in a group. I mean, these young ones are tweens. I think all but like one have a phone pretty much, right? But they don't have my number. They don't have Brother Skylar's number. If they need anything, their parents know how to contact us. We know how to contact their parents. We're not really doing anything that would require us to have to get out big memos. We can send a paper home with them, right? Kind of old school. But it's about protecting yourself. Anything else?
What are some things to look for recognizing the abuser? The person that's doing things that you look for, certain tendencies or the way they act.
Abusers are really good at what they do. They're really good. There's a grooming process, what we call grooming, right? So if they are overly affectionate with one particular child, if that one particular child says, and that's one of the things that we ask in a forensic interview, was there ever a time where they got you something but didn't get the other kids in the family something? Oh yeah, he takes me out for ice cream all the time. Or I'm the only one that gets to ride with him to the grocery store because I did XYZ. So kind of having that over-controlling factor on that particular child. Oftentimes too, we see a single mom, and we've worked a lot of like little league sports cases too, where they didn't have a dad figure, and his baseball coach wanted to be the dad. And so I thought, wow, my son's really struggling. What a great person to have be a leader in their life. And so I allowed them the opportunity to go camping with them that weekend, because finally a father figure, right? He's a baseball coach. He's little league. They did a background check. Like, why? It's the whole team going. Why should I be concerned? And what a breath of fresh air to have a weekend to myself as a single mom, right? Things like that. So that overbearing, over-affectionate singling out of a person, I always encourage, there's so many other ways to greet a kid other than a hug. Give them a high five, give them a fist bump, do a big wave. I know that sometimes they have like teachers that will have like welcoming their kids, and they have like little bullet points. It's like, how do you want to be greeted today? And it'll say like a high five, a wave, a fist bump, or do like a little dance or whatever. And the kid goes up and it gets to pick how they're greeted. Those are great ways. If you want to greet a kid, get them interactive, but then a hug is not an option, right? So how do you want to be greeted today? And you're still showing them that one-on-one attention, but you're not hugging them, right? We have some kids that will come up and just hug, and immediately we side hug, right? Because there's no reason why you should be fully wrapped around hugging a child and you don't know what their life is. Maybe that's the trigger. Maybe they were an abuse victim, and now then you're giving them a full frontal hug, and that could be the trigger that kind of makes them feel uncomfortable and potentially not come back. Not everybody likes hugs, right? Some people are big huggers, and they're like, everybody, I personally am not a hugger, and I'm like, okay. Hey, don't touch me. And that's how I am. And there's some people, and I would never tell someone like, please don't hug me. There's some people I don't mind getting hugs from. But day to day, if I'm greeted, it's more than likely, you can probably ask people, it's a side hug. Some people, and I think that's the best thing to do, is to watch for that, if they don't want to leave with that person. I think it's knowing your Sunday school policies and also checking in, especially we have a lot of parents that are split household, knowing, hey, can this person pick up this kid? If you don't know, ask, right? We had a case where our Sunday school policy, there was no updated contact information, and we knew that the parents had split, and he came in to pick up the kid, and we were like, is he supposed to be here to pick up this kid? We know he doesn't live in the home anymore. And so they did. They went and asked the mom, and she's like, yeah, he's fine. I didn't know he would be picking him up this early, but he said he would pick him up from church. But you never want to be the one that's like, oh, I let him go, I didn't realize. Because more than likely, they're not going to come to you, right, and air out all of their dirty laundry. It's embarrassing, especially if it's a domestic violence case. That mom's not going to come to you and say he beat me every single weekend for 5 weeks straight. Yes.
Are you familiar with Stewards of Children, like Darkness?
Yes, Darkness to Light. That is one of the trainings that we do.
Is that something that, we're thinking about at our church?
That's a great program.
Something you'd recommend?
Yes.
What's it called?
Darkness to Light. It's called Stewards of Children. I don't know what it is unless I know our trainer is set up to train them, and so it's about $10, $15 for a book, and they. You can do either like a live trainer or video sessions, but it teaches you the signs and how to report abuse, mandates, laws, do's, don'ts, things like that. But that's that's what we often do for our volunteers that come in. We use that curriculum. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
What do you say to the thought or the argument that, well, if I report, they're just going to end up in foster care or nothing's going to be done about it? So I worked in a daycare in college, and at nap time I saw something that was, for me in my sheltered home, was like horrible. And it looked like something very significant. And I spoke out immediately to the teacher, and she was like, oh, kids, that's the normal behavior for kids. I had never seen that as a normal behavior. She comes from a wonderful home, and CPS won't ever do anything about it. You can call and make a report, nothing ever happens. And so I think I've heard that kind of thought process from other people, like nothing will ever be done, or they could end up in a worse situation. How do you answer that, or what do you have?
Yeah, so there is something that we call exploratory. The child may be discovering that if they touch themselves in a certain way, it makes them feel a certain way, and so they continue to do that. It may be something that they're showing a friend. A lot of daycare times is when we see that exploratory. Boys realize that girls have different body parts and vice versa, and so it just becomes show and tell, and as a teacher, you're like, everyone pull up your pants. So that does happen, but also to that, how do you know it's exploratory? Because we don't know until we investigate and we find out more, right? So I always encourage report. And I always say the worst case scenario is you have CPS in your life, but also that's a whole other door of resources, because at that point they're not just saying like, okay, this assault came in, so we're only going to screen for this, and then after this, that's doors shut, right? We have a lot of parenting classes they offer. They can offer more resources. They can offer different materials and counseling. You know, like we have a lot of kids that come in that don't make an outcry, but we know parents just split up. They just lost a grandmother, and now then this child's backtracking. And so we're like, hey, I know they didn't make an outcry of sexual abuse, but we would like to offer counseling free of charge. There's so many other resources that are available. So I always say report, report, report. You don't know if it's exploratory or not. As far as the foster care system goes in the state of Texas, it is rough right now. There is not enough foster families. There is not enough places to house these children. That basically, if they're older than 10, let's see how we can help this family get some help, because we have nowhere to put them. And everyone thinks like, oh, well, I'll take a baby, I'll take an infant. We have infants now that are sitting at our CPS office because they can't find a placement. No one wants a drug baby with all the side effects that comes with that. It's hard. It's so hard right now in our foster care systems. And so we always, they may be in worse conditions going into foster care, but we have to take the risk. CPS does always look for that next of kin. If the parents are like, well, I'm fine with them being placed with grandma, and grandma has a clear background check, and grandma's willing to take on those children, that's an option. But if mom is like, I absolutely do not want them going to my mother, she raised me and I know what she's like, well, we can't place them there then, so I guess they're going to have to go into foster care. So 9 times out of 10, CPS really, or I would say 10 out of 10, they really do strive for that kinship placement. It's not straight foster care because our foster care system is so overloaded right now, and we have so many juveniles with no place to go, behavioral issues. We have resources that are getting closed because they're like, we're done housing these children. They've torn up everything they've encountered. And now then CPS is like, well, if they're over the age of 10, there's nowhere to send them. There is nowhere to send them to. I can't get them in there for another 5 months. What are we supposed to do in the 5 months? So they really focus on trying to reunite that family, trying to get the services for that family that they need. So at the end of the day, again, report, and that's really all we can do. Anything else? Yes.
You mentioned about, the babies that are in the system. So I am local. Where is there a place that I could go volunteer to, like, care for kids? Maybe, like,
Yeah, so we take volunteers at our center, and we have what we call family greeters. Most CAC, that's one of their big volunteer programs, and you can go in and you can sit with these families while they're there for services. A lot of times people get confused because, like, our organization, our name is Harold's House. So they think we house children, and we don't. And so we have some people that come in, and these kids are like, whoa, y'all live here? And we're like, no, we just work here. And so that's one way that you can kind of get involved with that way. There's a couple of adoption facilities, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, that are here that if you're looking into fostering to adopt, definitely search that in your area. There's different types of fostering. So you can say, I just want to foster until placement. I want to foster to adopt. I want to foster to reunite. There's all types of different ways that you could foster and care for these kids. Do not do it unless you feel called to do it. Right? The last thing we want to do is put these kids in another home where it's just as chaotic and overwhelming. Sometimes even worse than it was before. There's CPS will take volunteers to come in and help. CASA, they're a big one. You can volunteer with them as well. CASA's, if not bigger than the CACs of Texas, there's so many different CASA offices that is basically a child ad litem. So they go and they meet with that child. They talk with them. They kind of assess, how do you feel about being in your foster home? How do you feel about being away from mom? And they're kind of that non-biased point of contact, and then they make the recommendation to the team and to the judge on where that kid should go. There's lots of training that comes with that as well. So, yeah. All right. Anything else? No? Okay. So that training is Safe Churches is February 24th. Registration is still available. I encourage you, if you can't go to another training, send someone else from your church to that training. Ministers, youth pastors, people that are writing your policy over your Sunday school, directing all of that. Okay. Well, thank you all so much.